Part 2, my first year of theater school. Back in the mid-1980s, when I was researching where to attend university, there were only three universities in BC: University of British Columbia, UBC, in Vancouver, Simon Fraser University in Burnaby, and University of Victoria, aka UVIC, in Victoria. My friend Rayanne and I did a road trip to Vancouver Island when we were 16, and I decided then that of the three schools, UVic was my top choice. It put a body of water between me and my family, and it turned out UVic had a top-rated conservatory theater school, the Phoenix Theater. I graduated secondary school with honors and moved to Victoria at the end of June in 1986. I initially stayed with family friends over the summer, since they had a daughter my age, Sandy, who they thought I would be friendly with. Initially, it was awkward because my mom had painted a picture of me that was more beach bunny and less the nerdy punk rock chick that I actually was at the time. Or perhaps that was just Sandy and her friends' interpretation when they heard that I spent a lot of time up at Cultus Lake. They clearly had never been to Cultus and didn't realize it wasn't Malibu. At that time, Cultus Lake was an indigenous cultural hotspot, especially in the summer, with strong tribal influences and lots of fun activities and other shenanigans to get into. There were also tons of road trips to outdoor music festivals, Peach Fest, and new people to meet every summer, so not at all the scene that they were imagining, I guess. Their opinion of me changed once they saw my music collection, and I broke out Metallica's Ride the Lightning for them. All of a sudden, I was much cooler than they thought, but I wasn't without my own judgments of them. Turns out Sandy was kind of a dud who got pregnant that summer and had a kid as her next move out of high school. But I did become friends with some of her other friends I met that summer, and three of them actually became my ride or dies for the entire time that I lived in Victoria. I did a brief summer study skills program at UVic that was supposed to help me transition to university life, but what they were addressing were skills that I had already had and things I already did academically, so it kind of felt like a waste of time. But I did get acquainted with the campus and covertly checked out Phoenix Theater summer productions before I was an official first-year student there. That was when I discovered that the vast majority of theater students were non-traditional students, older and mostly from strong theater and entertainment business families. I would be among the youngest students to attend when I officially started in the fall. In September 1986, with the help of my mom and my Uncle Heinz, I moved from my family friend's place to the student residences at UVic. My room was on the second floor of the Hodgins buildings in the Lansdowne Student Residence Complex, an all-girl residence consisting mostly of prep school girls from Vancouver. Hasman stayed in the single room on one side of me, and Mary stayed in the single room on the other side. I shared a room with a young woman named Kim, who was from Salmon Arm. She was a year older than me and already drinking age, and that's how she spent most of our 1 year living together as roommates in res. Drunk and ready to party. We didn't get along very well, and at one point she tried to get me to move out so that a friend of hers who lived in another building in Lansdowne and didn't like her roommate either could move in. She also would wear my clothes when I went out of town, thinking that I wouldn't notice. One time, I came home early from a trip and caught her wearing my prom dress, the most expensive piece of clothing that I owned at that time. She wore it out to a pub crawl, stretched it out, and got blood all over the lace and sequins that make up the handkerchief cut length of the dress. She didn't even apologize or offer to pay to get the dress dry cleaned. So I spent a lot of time at the theater building on the other side of campus so I wouldn't have to deal with her. I moved out of res and into my first apartment that following summer. Fortunately, I enjoyed my first year of theater school. Phoenix Theater was the theatrical conservatory school at UVic, a professional theater company that put on top-rate productions attended by the students and the Victoria general public. Many of the people I went to school with went on to have stunning theater, film, and television careers, and if I dropped their names, you might even recognize some of them. I learned about theater history, all aspects of costuming and makeup, stagecraft, set and sound design, Stanislavski and method acting, and that eternal actor's question, what's my motivation? It was that question that would eventually lead me to switch majors, ultimately psychology. By the way, we ran 4 main stage productions during my first year of theater school: The Glass Menagerie by Tennessee Williams, The Miser by Moliere, Zastrozzi by George F. Walker, and West Side Story by Leonard Bernstein and Stephen Sondheim. The building itself had three primary theater spaces: a standard proscenium arch theater, which housed most of the main stages, but also a thrust theater, which is where The Miser was staged, and an open space theater where I performed in No Exit by John Paul Sartre, Hurly Burly by David Rabe, and Mother Courage and Her Children by Bertolt Brecht over the course of the next 2 years. In addition to the main stage performances, there were also other performances happening in the alternative open space theater as well as in the thrust. The main stage productions were directed by our professors, but BFA and MFA directing students also did productions, and undergrads in all years were encouraged to audition. Only it was very unlikely to get cast in anything, especially a main stage, as a first-year student. So many of us didn't even bother to audition for main stages and focused mostly on the student productions instead. And it was a huge surprise when one of the newly second-year students got cast as Laura in The Glass Menagerie. I worked front of house on that production along with three other first-year theater students, two of whom lived in the Lansdowne residences, although in different buildings from mine. One of them, Dee, planned to focus on stagecraft and stage management. Margaret, who was a year older than us, wanted to direct, and Carolyn, who was a Victoria local, who I just referred to as Boy George because she looked just like him, also wanted to act like me. They were in most of my classes with me, being that we were all first-year students and not differentiated yet by our theater focus area. Dee and Carolyn were always sweet to me, but Margaret was a bitch and never had anything nice to say. She was always calling me out for something, whether it was my leg warmers that I wore because I was self-conscious about my small ankles, or that I was faking sick to get out of work. Not that front of house is really work, it's mostly sitting around and smoking cigarettes while the show is running. So I wasn't really surprised when I heard Margaret describe how terrible Laura was, that they should have cast someone stronger, that you should never cast a first year, even though she was technically second year by that point and had been in the summer productions the previous summer as well. Margaret was just mean-spirited and maybe a bit jealous. And I made every attempt to never sign up for work assignments with her again so that I wouldn't have to interact with her as much. Even in a group of outcasts, I still felt like I never really fit in socially. But I enjoyed the work, and I especially the more academic classes like theater history, where I made my mark in first term by writing our first term paper assignment as a Greek tragedy, complete with chorus. Alan, our professor for that class, thought it was brilliant, read part of the play aloud in class, and later told me that I was way too smart to be an actor and that would be a waste of my big brain. I was flattered, but I didn't believe him. I didn't believe anyone who told me that I was super smart, even when I was subjected to IQ testing before and during my lab rat days when I became part of the human subject pool as a psychology undergraduate student. By this time, a lot of my childhood confidence has been eroded by unkind people who had their own motives for putting me in my place. So when auditions came around, I did an audition for The Miser, even though it was a period piece and would have been a lot of fun to have been in. Instead, I opted to work on costuming and took care of all the wigs used in that production. That was how I got to know Jerry, who played Belier in that production. He wore a long, elaborate dark wig over his short, curly, dirty blonde hair, and I had to put it in pin curls every night after performance to keep it looking buoyant and luxurious. He would hang out before and after the show, lingering to talk with me and tell me about his other acting experiences. He was 26 years old at the time and from a famous acting family in Vancouver. He had been at the Phoenix Theatre for 4 years already by that time and has been cast in most of the productions. He taught me how he flashes his eyes, a move that is kind of mesmerizing and makes you appear more attractive than you actually are. It's a great trick to do if you ever want to get anyone's attention and make them stare at you. So by the time the Miser rap party rolled around, I was already getting sexy vibes from Jerry. We were so tight-knit as a theater company that it was difficult to determine who was in relationship with who, unless a big public display was made of it. There were a few golden couples among the more senior students, but it wasn't clear if Jerry was part of such a couple because his focus was always on the work, unless he was talking with me privately, of course. Being one of the few people who were still under legal drinking age at the time, everyone thought it would be funny to get me drunk. People kept pouring drinks down my throat at the rap party, and I got totally wasted and needed to leave. Jerry volunteered to walk me across campus to my dorm. Because he was concerned about my safety. As it turned out, My roommate Kim was staying over at her boyfriend's place that night, so there was no one else in my dorm room when we got there. I obviously was in no condition to give consent, but that didn't stop Jerry, because after all, I was that really hot first-year theater student with the banging body that everyone kept commenting on. And someone had to get the first taste, right? Especially when he'd spent the entire run chatting me up in the wig room. Everyone wants to fuck the ingenue.